Montana Territory, July 1879. The sun was sinking low behind the crazy mountains when Boone Kessler spotted smoke curling above the old Miller barn, abandoned since the spring thaw. He pulled his horse to a stop, frowning beneath the brim of his hat. No one was supposed to be out this far. The land was dry, and even a careless spark could burn half the valley. Boone dismounted, rifle slung across his back, and crept up the slope through the tall grass. The barn loomed ahead, weathered boards graying under years of snow and sun. A horse was tethered out front, lathered in sweat, nostrils flaring like it had been ridden hard and fast. Inside, the smoke was thin, more smell than sight. Boone stepped carefully over the threshold, boots silent on the packed dirt floor. The moment he entered, he heard a sharp, muffled cry from the far end, behind the haystack. He moved fast. Behind the hay, tied to a post with thick rope cutting into her wrists and ankles, was a woman in a torn white dress. Her dark hair clung to her face and her lips were cracked from thirst. But her eyes were fire. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. As he stepped forward, Boone raised his hands. "I am not here to hurt you. My name is Boone Kessler. I saw the smoke. I am going to get you out of here." Her jaw trembled, but she nodded once. He pulled his knife from his belt and cut through the ropes. The instant her hands were free, she reached for her throat like she still felt the pressure of a noose. Boone caught her gently by the shoulders to steady her. She looked up at him. "My name is Noelle Prescott." He had never seen anyone look so worn or so proud at the same time. Boone helped her stand. She stumbled and he caught her against his chest. "I swear," she whispered, "I was supposed to be married today." Boone looked down at her. "You were," she nodded. "They dragged me from my wagon before I reached town. I do not even know who they were." Boone's jaw tightened. He had seen evil before: outlaws, raiders, men who thought they could do what they pleased with no consequences. But this was worse. Whoever did this had meant to leave her out here for dead. "Come on," he said. "My horse is outside. We will go slow." She leaned on him as they walked, her bare feet bleeding from struggling against the barn floor. Boone lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, steadying her with one arm. She trembled but did not cry. She just leaned into him like she needed to feel something solid. They rode back to his cabin near the river, tucked deep in the cottonwoods. By the time they arrived, dusk had settled over the valley like a warm blanket. Boone carried her inside and set her gently on his bed. "You are safe here." She looked around the small room, her voice quiet. "Why are you alone out here?" Boone poured her water and handed it to her. "I came back from the war and did not feel like being around people much." She drank, then looked up at him. "You fought in the war?" Boone nodded once. "Union cavalry." "Virginia, mostly." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "I lost my brother at Spotsylvania." He sat at the edge of the table, watching her. "I am sorry." Noel's voice was low. He was 18. Boone did not say anything. There was nothing to say. They both knew the cost of that war. She stayed quiet for a while, eyes drifting closed, the cup still in her hand. Boone took it from her gently and set it down. "You can sleep," he said. "No one will come here." She opened her eyes again. "You do not know that." He met her gaze. "I do." She looked at him for a long time and then, finally, nodded. Boone pulled an extra blanket over her and sat near the hearth, rifle in his lap, eyes on the door until the fire burned low. By morning, she was already awake, sitting on the porch wrapped in his coat, staring out at the river. "I was not just getting married," she said quietly when Boone stepped outside. "I was going to start a new life. He was a friend of my father's. I did not love him, but I thought it was what I needed. Safety, a name, a place." Boone sat beside her. "And now," Noelle turned her head toward him. "Now I do not know who I am anymore." Boone reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are someone who survived." Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. They spent the next few days in the quiet rhythm of healing. Boone mended her dress. Noelle fed the chickens and helped him gather water. They did not speak about what happened unless she brought it up, and when she did, Boone listened. The bruises faded. Her smile returned, slow but real. One evening, as they shelled beans on the porch, she said, "You asked me if I was married. I was not, but I was trying to be someone else. Someone smaller. Easier. I did not want to live loud like my mother. She was Cherokee. My father sent her away when I was 7. Said it was not proper." Boone looked over at her, the light catching in her hair. "You do not have to be smaller here," he said. She turned toward him, eyes wide. Boone looked down at the beans in his hands. "You do not have to pretend with me." "I know what it feels like to run from something inside you," she swallowed. "What are you running from?" Boone's voice was quiet. "Guilt. I came back from that war alive when others did not, so I took land, kept quiet, stayed out of the world." She reached out, placing her fingers over his. "You saved me." He looked up. "You saved me back." They sat like that as the sun dipped behind the trees, and something inside both of them shifted, like a door creaking open that had been locked for years. That night, Boone went out to check the fence. When he came back in, Noelle was by the fire, holding a small box he had kept buried under the floorboard. Inside it were a few old letters, a locket, and a photo of his younger brother. "I did not mean to pry," she said softly, "but I saw the floorboard was loose." Boone took a breath. "That is my brother, Illy. He died in the war. I never told anyone about him." She handed him the photo. "You just did." He looked at her, and in that moment, he knew she was not just someone he had rescued. She was the only person who had ever truly seen him. And somehow, in all the wreckage, they had found each other. The river swelled with melt from the high peaks, its current tugging at the banks just past Boone's corral. Noelle stood at the edge of the porch with her arms folded, watching a crow hop along the fence post. The morning was cool, the sky shot through with thin clouds. Boone was hammering a loose board on the shed roof, glancing toward her more often than the nails he drove. She turned at the sound of his boots in the grass. "I want to ride out," she said. "I need to see where it happened. I need to know how far I got." Boone wiped his hands on his trousers. "It's south toward the old Gallatin Trail. You sure you want that in your head again?" She nodded. "It's already there. I'd rather meet it standing." They rode out just after noon, taking Boone's second horse, a sorrel with a steady gait and a worn saddle. Noelle sat straight, her spine quiet with purpose. Boone didn't speak unless she did, letting her guide the silence between them. They reached the clearing by late afternoon. The grass was flattened in places, horseshoe prints dried in the dirt. A broken wheel rim lay half buried in the brush, cracked clean through. Noelle dismounted and walked slowly toward it, her boots brushing the grass. "This was where I stopped," she said, mostly to herself. "I remember the wheel catching, the cart lurching, then the sound of hooves behind me." Boone stayed beside her, one hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. She crouched, touching the rim. "I thought if I just kept moving, I'd be safe. I didn't think they'd follow this far off the main road." "They knew you wouldn't be missed for a while," Boone said. Noelle stood, brushing her skirt. "Whoever they were, they planned it." Boone looked over the trail, jaw working. "You remember anything about them? Their voices, faces?" She shook her head. "Just the smell of tobacco, not pipe smoke, chewed, strong, and one of them had a limp. Left side." Boone nodded, filing it away. "We'll go into town tomorrow. I've got a name in mind, Harlan McKibben. Rides with 2 others, used to work freight. Got run out of Bozeman for fencing stolen horses. He limps." Noelle's expression hardened. "Then I'd like to see his face." They rode back slower than they'd come. The sun began to slip behind the ridges, casting long shadows over the grass. Noelle's voice broke the quiet. "Why do you stay out here, really?" she asked. "You said guilt, but that's not all." Boone didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the cottonwoods like a soft breath. "I had someone once," he said finally. "After the war, her name was Lisa. She wanted a life with fences and neighbors and church on Sundays." She turned her head toward him. "I couldn't give it to her," Boone continued. "I'd see a blue coat in town and feel my lungs tighten. Couldn't sleep with a roof over me at first. Took me years to stop flinching at loud sounds. She waited a while, then she married a preacher in Helena." Noelle didn't speak. Boone glanced at her. "I don't tell you that for pity," he said. "Just so you know I've lost things too." I didn't think you hadn't, she replied. But it means something that you told me. They reached the cabin just before dusk. Boone unsaddled the horses while Noelle lit the lamp inside. She moved easily now, as if the space had started to bend around her. Later, they sat on the floor beside the hearth, eating beans and cornbread from tin plates. Noelle leaned back against the wall, eyes half-lidded. My mother used to sing Creek songs, she said, low and slow like the water itself. I don't remember the words, just the sound of them. Boone looked over at her. Do you wish you'd learned more? She nodded. I was too scared to ask when I was a child. My father made it clear what parts of me were acceptable. Boone set his plate aside. You're not a child now. She met his gaze. No, but it's hard to find pieces you were told to throw away. They sat in the hush that followed. Then Boone reached behind the stove and pulled out a folded hide-bound book. He handed it to her. My brother's, he said. He kept a journal. Wrote down things he heard from the scouts in the field. Some Cherokee words in there, other tongues too. He thought it might matter one day. Noelle opened it carefully, her fingers brushing the inked lines. This is the first thing anyone has given me that feels like it could have come from my mother. Boone's voice was quiet. Then maybe it's time you took something back. She looked up at him, and something in her eyes softened, not relief, not gratitude, something older than both. The fire crackled between them. Boone didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The look she gave him said she was already there. The wind off the hills carried the sharp scent of pine and dry earth as Boone and Noelle rode down into Livingston 2 days later. Boone kept to the edges of the old cattle road, where the brush grew thicker and offered cover. Noelle wore a wide-brimmed hat low over her face, her posture calm but tightly wound. They dismounted behind the livery stable, where the dust was packed hard and the air smelled of horse sweat. Boone looped the reins and turned to her. If McKibben's in town, he'll be in the saloon by now, he said. He plays cards late when he's flush. Noelle's voice was steady. You'll know if it's him, I'll know. She glanced toward the mouth of the alley. I don't want to be out of sight. You won't be. Boone stepped through the back entrance of the saloon, where the light was dim and the floor slanted slightly to one side. The sound of low conversation and clinking glass filled the room, but Boone's attention fixed on the table near the far wall. 3 men sat there, one with his left leg stretched stiff under the chair. The man's coat was worn at the elbow, his hat tipped too far back for the hour. Boone didn't look toward Noelle, who stood just outside the corner window under the awning. He walked up slow, letting each step land deliberate. You're Harlan McKibben, Boone said. The man tilted his head. Who's asking? Boone didn't answer. He was watching the man's eyes, how they flicked to the door, then to the sawed-off shotgun leaning against the wall behind him. You rode east last week, Boone said. Took the trail down near Willow Creek. You and your boys found a woman alone. McKibben's jaw shifted. Don't know what you're talking about. You left her tied in a barn. The man to McKibben's right pushed his chair back, a little hand drifting toward his belt. Boone's voice remained level. You left her for dead. McKibben leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. You accusing me of something? Boone's hand rested on his hip. No, I'm telling you I know what you did, McKibben's lip curled. Then maybe you ought to forget it, ain't your concern. It is now. Boone didn't draw, he didn't need to. He saw it in the way McKibben's shoulder stiffened, the way his boot edged back under the chair. You do this often? Boone asked. Wait on the road for someone alone and unarmed? You got no proof. Boone turned slightly, just enough for Noelle to step inside. Her voice cut through the room like a drawn blade. I remember your voice. McKibben's face drained of color. He stood too fast, knocking the chair aside. I remember the tobacco on your breath, she said, and the way you laughed when I screamed. The saloon went quiet. Boone didn't move. McKibben's friend made a twitch toward his holster, but Boone's voice stopped him cold. You want to die over him? The man froze. McKibben's hands were trembling now. You can't prove nothing. You think anyone here'll take her word over mine? Noelle stepped forward. I don't need them to. I just needed you to know I'm not afraid anymore. Boone took her hand. We're leaving. You try to follow us, I'll bury you where you stand. They walked out together, past the stunned faces and the silence thick as molasses. Boone didn't look back. Outside, the wind had shifted. The sun was brighter. Noelle let out a slow breath. I didn't expect it to feel like that, she said. Like what? Like I got something back, not everything, but enough. Boone helped her into the saddle. You want to keep riding or head home? She looked at him. Home? The ride back was quiet but different from their last. The silence was no longer heavy. It settled between them like a shared language. At the cabin, Boone unsaddled the horses while Noelle carried water from the river. They moved around each other with ease now, their rhythms fitted together like pieces of a worn map. After supper, Noelle stood at the hearth, drying her hands. Boone leaned against the wall, watching her. I've been thinking, he said. About the land up near the ridge, there's good soil there. Room for another dwelling. She turned. You want to build something? I want you to have something that's yours, he said. If you want it. She stepped closer, her hands still damp from the wash basin. Boone, I don't need a house to know what I have. He didn't speak, not right away. Then he reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. I never thought I'd feel whole again, he said. Not until you. She looked up at him and her voice was quiet. You didn't find me in that barn, we found each other, he nodded. And I'm not letting go. She rose onto her toes, their foreheads touching, their breath shared between open spaces. No words passed after that. None were needed when morning came. Boone stepped outside to hitch the horses, and Noelle joined him with a rolled blanket and a packed tin. They were heading to the ridge, to mark the spot where they'd build their life together. Under a Montana sky that no longer felt so wide, by late August, the ground above the ridge had been cleared and staked, and the heat had softened just enough to work without drowning in sweat. Boone hauled the last of the cedar posts from the lower stand of trees, shoulders tight from days of lifting, but there was a steadiness in the ache labor done for something that held. Noelle stood barefoot in the dirt, eyes narrowed against the afternoon sun as she measured the distance between stakes. She held a length of twine taut along one line, her brow furrowed in thought. It's leaning east, she said, not looking up. The far post. Just a few inches. Boone stepped beside her, squinting down the line. You see it? I feel it, she said, placing her hand flat against her chest. It pulls wrong. He cocked his head, studying the angle again. All right. We'll shift it. They moved the post without speaking, the heat pressing down like a wool blanket across their backs. When it was done, Boone sat on an overturned bucket, wiping his neck with a rag. Noelle crouched beside the water pail, cupping her hands and drinking deep. You ever build a place before? Boone asked, watching her. She sat back on her heels. A lean-to once, out past Fort Smith. My mother taught me how to lash branches with willow bark, kept the rain off decent enough. Boone nodded, eyes on the dirt. You ever want to go back there, to Arkansas? She shook her head. Too much memory and too little left. He ran a hand along his jaw. I only ask 'cause I keep thinking about what kind of land you'd want if it were yours alone. She stood and walked to where the trees began, brushing her fingertips against the bark of a slender birch. This is the kind I'd choose, high up away from roads. Water close enough to hear it at night. Boone watched her in the quiet that followed. Then we picked right. That evening they returned to the cabin in near dark, their clothes dusted with sawdust and earth. Boone lit the lantern while Noelle folded the marked plans and set them aside. The room smelled of pine pitch and river stone from their boots. Boone pulled a small canvas bag from the shelf and laid it on the table. I've been holding on to this for years, he said. Didn't know what for until now. Noelle sat across from him, her face unreadable. He untied the cord and opened the flap. Inside was a narrow strip of blue silk, faded but intact, wrapped around a brooch carved from bone. My brother carved it, Boone said. He traded for the silk before we shipped out. Said he'd give it to someone who made him feel like the world hadn't gone to rot. He slid it across the table. He never got the chance, but I figure maybe I can. Noelle didn't touch it right away. Her fingers hovered above the silk, then slowly closed around it. "Boone," she said, voice low, "you don't owe me anything?" "I know," he said, "that's why it's real." She looked up then, and whatever had kept her guarded broke apart between one breath and the next. "I want to stay," she said, "not just here." "I want to build it with you," he exhaled, slow and sure. "You already are." The next morning, Boone rode into the valley to trade for iron nails and sugar. While he was gone, Noelle gathered stones from the river, sorting them by weight and shape. She placed them in quiet stacks near the ridge, marking where the hearth would go. She worked until her hands went raw, then sat beneath a cottonwood, feet in the shallows. When Boone returned near sundown, he found her asleep with her head resting on one arm, the brooch pinned to her collar like it had always belonged there. He didn't wake her. He sat beside her instead, watching the sky turn the color of rust and honey, knowing the days to come would be full of splinters and sweat. But they'd be theirs. And at long last, that was enough. The frame of the house rose slowly through the end of summer, each beam hewn by Boone's axe and lifted into place by both their hands. The walls stood bare and clean against the open sky, smelling of pitch and sweat, and the work of two people learning how to lean into one another without losing their footing. Noelle took to shaping the windows herself. She liked the way light moved across the grain, how it bent through glass and found the floor. Late one morning, as Boone braced a crossbeam into place, Noelle returned from the stream with a hem full of wild mint. She stepped close enough for the scent to reach him, sharp and cool in the rising heat. "I want to try something with the bread," she said, setting the bundle on the table where their tools lay. "My mother used to boil mint leaves and pour the water into the flour. She said it made the crust wake up." Boone wiped his hands and looked at her. "You remember that clear?" "I remember the smell of it more than the taste." He nodded, then bent to check the joint on the frame. "You think the house will hold through the first freeze, if the ridge doesn't shift and the river doesn't rise?" "Yes." Boone brushed sawdust from his shirt. "And if it does?" She looked toward the horizon. "Then we rebuild." By the time the sun slid behind the cottonwoods, the sky had taken on the purple hush of early autumn. Boone sat on the new stoop, boots untied, whittling a strip of cedar bark. Noelle came down from the ridge path holding a bundle wrapped in linen. "I found something," she said, unwrapping it to reveal a small clay vessel half buried near the roots of an old tree. "It's old, fired low, probably hand-coiled. Someone left it here before we ever stepped foot on this slope." Boone turned the vessel in his palm. "You think it belonged to the Apsaluk?" "Could be. The clay's the same color as the banks downriver. It's been here longer than the town." He set it beside him on the stoop. "You want to keep it?" "I want to learn how to make one like it." Boone watched her, the last light catching against her profile. "You always surprise me." She sat beside him, drawing her knees up. "I don't want to forget what came before me, not now. Not when I finally feel like I'm standing in it instead of running from it." Boone leaned back on his hands. "You think we're ready to stop running?" "I think we already have." The first frost came early and the cabin walls held. Noelle lined the shelves with dried roots and slivers of apple, while Boone reinforced the door with a second hinge. The wind sang low through the trees, and at night they read by firelight from Ellie's journal, the pages softened by years but still legible. Boone taught her to trace stars from the porch, naming constellations the way his father had before the war took him. She taught Boone to grind corn with a stone, pressing it into fine meal between two flat rocks. They traded knowledge without ceremony, the way people do when they mean to stay. One evening, as snow drifted down in slow spirals, Boone placed a small pouch in her hands. Inside was a ring made from river iron, polished until it shone dull and honest. "I can't offer you a church or a town full of witnesses," he said, voice low. "But I can offer you my name, my steadiness, and all my winters." Noelle held the ring between her thumb and forefinger. "You already gave me the only thing that mattered." She slid it on her finger, and Boone exhaled like a man who'd been holding breath for years. They married at the edge of their land, with the trees as witness and the river speaking soft behind them. Noelle wore her mother's beads woven into her braid, and Boone wore a clean shirt he hadn't touched since the day he returned from Virginia. There was no preacher, only vow and intent spoken plain, words shaped by wind and truth. That night, with snow falling steady, they lay wrapped in one blanket on the floor of their new home, the hearth warm and the walls silent and sure. Boone ran his hand down her back, steady and slow, memorizing the shape of her shoulder beneath flannel. "Did you ever think you'd end up here?" she whispered. "No," he said, "but that's the thing about peace. You don't find it where you expect. You find it where someone's willing to build it with you." She turned toward him, pressing her forehead to his. "Then we keep building." They did, through snowmelt and green shoots, through dry seasons and heavy fruit they built. Boone crafted a second room as the years passed, and Noelle planted sage along the ridge. She shaped pots from river clay and traded them in town for flour and salt. Boone grew quieter, more solid. Noelle grew surer, her laughter louder now, unhidden. They never spoke again of the barn, or the road, or the man who'd once tried to take her power. Not because it didn't matter, but because it had been laid down like a stone at the edge of a new foundation. Not forgotten, just no longer in the way. Years later, when a boy with Boone's eyes and Noelle's fire ran through the cottonwoods chasing their dog, she stood at the porch beside Boone and watched the sky turn gold. "You still feel it?" he asked, his hand finding hers. "Every day," she said. "The quiet, the belonging." You, and Boone, who had once carved out a life from silence and dirt, turned to the woman who had made it full, and kissed her like the world would never ask anything more of them again. Which, at long last, it didn't.